I'm thrilled to be able, I'm thrilled to close this dialogue for climate and start this second edition.
So, peut-être avant de commencer, on va avoir
Before starting, we will have interpretation. People will speak French or English. So you have an interpretation icon on the bottom Zoom bar. Just click on that button and select the language of your choice.
The panelists that we're going to have today are going to speak in French and English. If you want to have translation, you have a little icon at the bottom of your screen. So I ask you if you want to click on it and choose the language of your own choosing. So peut-être en commençant, écoutez bien, je
To start up, hello everyone. Even if this is a virtual event, most of us, we are located in Tiohtià:ke, which is the city of Montreal, a land that served as an exchange land for Indigenous people, Anishinaabe nations, and Anishinaabe nations. Now, we just want to recognize and respect these nations as stewards of the lands on which we gather today. And we thank them for their hospitality. If you look up in the chat, if you wish, there is a map of the different maps of the different nations. Thank you to the organizations organizing this first edition of a Climate Dialogues. 2 weeks, 2 intersectional discussions for consensus on broad issues. During the COP, like last year, COP26, the dialogues were organized by COP2Com, Youth Environment Federation of Workers of Quebec, David Suzuki, Foundation Oxfam Quebec, Climate Reality Quebec, Action Climate Quebec, Sherbrooke University, Climatoscope, and this gathered close to 1,200 people. We're very proud, and we would like, before studying, we would like to thank our sponsor, FTQ Fund, who has sponsored this event today. Thank you to the Solidarity Fund. I forgot to say who I am, Patrick Rondeau, advisor at the Federation of Workers of Quebec, and I will be the moderator today. Now, to use the words of Eddie Perez that I will introduce in a few minutes, a COP is a place of expression, place of action is all over the year. So it is important to work, all of us, from where we are located and to make our world better. During the year, this work is being done. Today's activity is within this reality. Just want to add that the event will be recorded. It is right now, so be advised. Once again, if you are just joining, the event will be held in French and in English. We have simultaneous translation. You just click on the icon on the bottom Zoom bar.
Interpretation for this event. There's an icon at the bottom of your screen, so you can click on it and choose your own language. Donc, présentons maintenant.
Let us introduce our panelists. We have high quality people. First, Eddie Perez, Director of International Climate Diplomacy for Climate Action Network Canada. Hello, Eddie. Hello, Patrick. Thank you very much for the invitation. Mrs. Chloe Adams, British Consul General in Montreal. Hello, Chloe. Hello, Patrick. Thank you for the invitation. We have Alejandro de Luca, the author of the first part of the GIEC report, Assistant Department at the University of Quebec, Montreal. Alejandro, hello. Hello, Patrick. Thank you very much for your invitation. Thrilled to be here. And Graham Reed, Division of Territory and Water for First Nations in Canada. Hello, I'm very happy to join you. So Senior Policy Advisor at Assembly of First Nations. And our Excellency, Ambassador Ahmed Abu Zaid. Hello.
Good afternoon. Thank you very much, Patrick, and hello, everybody.
We have 1 hour in front of us, and basically with the panelists, we will see what they remember from COP26, what are the main issues, and then we will talk about COP27, one after the other. Alejandro, about the scientific items, we talked about the first, second, third report of GX. What about COP26? Thank you very much, Patrick. This is what I wanted to say. How COP26 used mainly the #1 working group, the first report of GIEC. We have to remember that in November 2021, during COP26, until then, there was only the first part of the report that had been published. As a scientist, we were active in developing the report, and it was taken into consideration in a very systematic way. Let us remember that this is the most reliable and overall assessment of risk and solutions about climate risk. But then we had seen only the first part of the report. It was recognized several times in the report. For example, the fact that warming of 1 degree today is totally due to human activity. And that was recognized. It was recognized also that the difference between limited the warming between 1.5 to 2 degrees is important. We have to make further efforts so that the Paris Accord will be successful. It recognizes also that to reach warming of 1.5 degree, we need quick and overall and deep reduction in our society and also in the greenhouse gases. Otherwise, we will not be able to limit the warming. We can't hear you, Patrick. Thank you very much. After 2 years, I thought I would have learned about muting and unmuting. Thank you very much, Alejandro Coe. UK was chairing COP26, and it ended with the Pact on Glasgow, a very important report. And according to Alejandro, the expectations were high. What do you have to say about that? The last report of GIEC showed very clearly, once again, the urgency of action on climate change. And we are convinced that COP26 was a historical success. Close to 200 countries gathered in Glasgow in November and agreed on the Glasgow Climate Pact you have mentioned, Patrick, asking countries to reinforce their goals of reducing GHG by 2030 and to reduce gradually coal and also subsidies to fossil fuel. It contains ambitious language on adaptation to protect people and also nature from climate change impacts. And an important language on the climate financing, supporting developing countries. At COP26, we have reached important items of the Paris rule book. What seems very important also is everything that happened outside the negotiations at such countries, financial institutions, businesses, among other actors, took action to accelerate transition towards a zero carbon economy in all actors of the economy. So we saw very important commitments on methane, forest, clean technology, electric vehicles. As president, we also try to be as inclusive as possible to have true involvements with civil society, youth, native communities, and so on. At COP26, major steps were done, but there's still a lot of work to do if we can limit the increase of temperature to 1.5 degrees. Thank you very much. Eddie, as Eddie talked about the red flag, and the Glasgow Pact was a very wide, tried to answer those expectations. It's a first wording about this. We talked about adaptation, financing, the role of civil society. What about environmental groups? What do you remember from COP26? I think that COP26 was, in fact, a reflection of what we will see in the future while climate action is being accelerated. And we are trying, in fact, to do whatever we can do to meet the huge impact of climate crisis and also the global shock. The COP was held when the whole planet was reacting to a pandemic. And we continue to face the pandemic and the impact of the pandemic. We should never forget to what point the impact was important, not only on participation, but how the states were presented at the COP26. We should remember that let us not do the mistakes of the past, where COP was like disconnected from the reality or the day-to-day life of people. In the past years, we saw how much there was this disconnect, and it ended with terrible moments with important demonstrations and indigenous groups during other COPs in the fact. So this recent COP was a meeting in a way to a global crisis, but it's the COP of climate plans. Countries had to show if they were at the right level in the field of equity, the capacity of a state to put in place social policies so that climate plans are as fair as possible. It was the questioning COP, as you said, questioning whether, because there were steps concerning grants to fossil fuel, but Quebec said it's over. Expanding hydrocarbon projects, and also it is about mobilization, a very determining moment for this dialogue, where civil society, even from Canada, was involved in negotiations and succeeded until the end of the day, influencing the results, either because we made huge steps about the damages, and 2 days after the COP, Canada has the most devastating flood in BC. So we cannot disconnect what we live in each of our country with the result of a COP. And this brings us to this second reflection. And hopefully I will be able to have this reflection with all of you. How will COP26 or 27 will become this continuity where we accelerate climate action, where we ensure that our plans meet people's expectations, but also that all this is done in the field of climate justice as presented in report number 2 of IPCC 2 weeks ago. Thank you very much, Eddie. Graham? We often talk about COP being states negotiating, and Eddie is talking about civil society mobile engagement. Chloe talked about it also, saying, okay, they had a role to play. Now, Eddie, we didn't speak about indigenous nations. Eddie talked about the huge floods. We know that the most vulnerable people are those who are impacted by the climate crisis. And traditional knowledge can prevent some climate disasters. Graham, according to you, what is the place of indigenous people in co-op? What do you remember from co-op 26? Thank you very much. I will answer in English, if I may.
So I was just saying I'm going to respond in English, but I want to just pick up on one point that you shared, Patrick, and Eddie echoed in the opening remarks about the role of the COP and the role of national or subnational action. And I guess it's important in the work that we do to acknowledge what is the specific role of the COP and where the action happens in spaces like this with the climate dialogues. And so for us, for Indigenous representation within the UNFCCC and within the UN systems, more broadly, our questions and demands have been quite similar since the Haudenosaunee Confederacy showed up at the League of Nations in the 50s, which is to say, recognize us as nations, that we have made agreements with, many states around the world that respect the kind of distinct status and rights that Indigenous peoples bring to the conversation. And I think, the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples and the way in which it's entering into the conversations at the COP has been emblematic of that growing recognition. And it was, and want to acknowledge Chloe and the UK presidency in the way in which we were able to center the voices and experiences of Indigenous peoples within the very colonial state-driven process that is the UNFCCC. And so we were lucky to have support in our Indigenous Peoples Pavilion that had presentations from Indigenous nations from all 7 regions across the world. For the first time ever, we had an annual knowledge holders gathering within the formal Blue Space, which, ironically enabled Indigenous peoples to actually choose who could enter the room and who couldn't. The symbolic reclamation of space, I think, and the role that the work of the local communities and Indigenous peoples platform and the facilitative working group do to help bring that, and how that's going to continue with the adoption of the next 3-year work plan. And then finally, obviously, the Glasgow Climate Pact having an increasing role in bridging those differences between the voices of Indigenous peoples and the direction that parties give to their own respective countries. There was an explicit recognition for parties to include Indigenous peoples within that space. But I will say, and I think this is important, that space isn't ours. It's not an Indigenous space. And so for us, through mechanisms like the International Indigenous Peoples Forum on Climate Change, our work is how do we create those parallel spaces and how do we interface with the COP and other UN processes in a way that acknowledges, as I mentioned earlier, those distinct rights, those distinct nations, and this distinct role that our knowledge systems, not just data, play within the space itself. And so, that's work that's ongoing. And that's work that we're continuing to build through the COPs. And like Eddie said, I think it's it's an exciting opportunity to share this space with the ambassador and also with the Egyptian presidency to see how we continue that growing trajectory for that nation-based recognition of Indigenous peoples. And we wish for that. And I will say, I neglected to acknowledge that I'm joining in Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh lands, and part of the role of acknowledging Indigenous nations within these spaces is also acknowledging that, even for me as an Anishinaabe man, I'm an uninvited guest in this territory, and there are certain responsibilities and protocols that we carry, and as you indicated in the beginning, Patrick, in how we exercise that relationship. So good for that.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much, Graham, Your Excellency, for our last roundtable for this first block. So we talked. I want to thank you, and the government of Egypt, the commitment for COP27. It is very important. We saw some items from FPCC reports, danger of climate risk declarations, work plans that are ongoing. They need to be followed up, and the role between the states, civil society, and stakeholders and nations that are not always recognized in the COP during negotiations, as Graham just said. And this trajectory towards COP27, what do you remember from COP26?
Well, thank you very much again for inviting me today and to join you in this very interesting and enlightening discussion. Let me start by saying that the main outcome that we came out with in COP26 was the confirmation of the political will at the highest level, actually, through the participation of the more than 130 heads of states and more than 50,000 participants. This actually highlighted as well the deep concern by the populations, by the NGOs, by the academia, of the impacts of the climate change. It also administrated and demonstrated the commitment by the majority of stakeholders to take part in the transition to a new economic model, focusing on the achievement of low emission and the resilient future in the context of the sustainable development agenda. I do also believe that the outcomes from both the negotiation track and the informal initiatives track have reflected the sense of responsibility of all stakeholders working in this. Science has also confirmed the need for more ambitious targets by year 2030. More actions need to be taken on the ground to achieve the goal of maintaining the rate of temperature increase at 1.5 degrees. We also need to maintain the momentum realized in Glasgow, pertaining specifically to the updating the NDCs and continuing to scale up the ambitions by each and every country. As it's clear, of course, that all relevant studies has showed that the developing countries specific are in dire need for around $5.6 trillion up to year 2030. So to implement basically their national determined contributions. Glasgow was very vocal on that, and this is a good achievement. And Glasgow was very vocal on the need to support the developing countries, in particular in the area of adaptation. It is obvious that in Glasgow, the conference have succeeded in tackling the key issues with contributions and pledges, but there is an urgent need now to move to the implementation phase. And this is why Egypt have called the COP27 meeting is as the summit and the meeting for implementation summit, and to work on striking the right balance between the main negotiated issues, mainly mitigation and adaptation and dealing with the losses and damages in general. We have a clear vision on that as a presidency for the COP27, which I will be sharing with you later on. But I personally believe that creating this kind of linkage between COP26 and COP27, the build-up on what has been achieved in Glasgow, and maintaining the momentum and political will that has been there in Glasgow is the main key for success and factor for success in COP.
Merci beaucoup, Son Excellence. Thank you very much. On va aller maintenant vers tranquillement l'ambassadeur, Son Excellence.
Now, the ambassador leads up towards our COP27. We all have high expectations, and as was said, very complex. Issues will be decided for COP27 and possibly ensure the success of future negotiations. We wonder every time, how can we make a difference in the next COP? Yes, indeed. Chloe, with what was done since COP27 and bridge towards COP27, it's like a heritage, right? It's as if we would leave our child in the hands of the next one to come. But there is a heritage. What are the key ingredient for success in COP26? Until COP27, we have a lot of work to do. Of course, we will work closely with the government of Egypt during the next months. The president of COP27, Al-Shamas, stays in his position. He has a huge team in London around him, and the whole diplomatic network of UK all over the world is totally engaged, like myself. But my mandate is for Quebec. But we have attachés in Ottawa working for the federal government. I don't know how to say it in English, but the high-level climate change champion is working closely also with the Egyptian champions. Eddie said that COP is not a time, it's a process over a whole year. So this year, we will work on all multilateral moments, G7, G20, all the opportunities to increase the ambition and keep this momentum. For the next months, we have identified 4 objectives. The first one is to ensure that the promises for reducing greenhouse gases are respected, to limit to 1.5 degrees. So everyone should respect the climate pact to reinforce the objective and be aligned with the Paris Accord, and also the net zero commitments and reduction for 2030. The other objective is to support more vulnerable countries to ensure that damages are honored. And second objective is a financial one. We work with the countries and institutions, financial and private and public institutions, so that everyone can meet its commitment. Fourth objective is about collaboration with countries, but also national stakeholders to accelerate action in all the different sectors of the economy, and also to continue to be as inclusive as possible. I said at the beginning that COP26 was representing a historical success. These are words on a page. If we cannot take action right now in a very ambitious way, this is what we want to do this year, and in close collaboration, as I said, with Egypt. Thank you very much. Thank you, Chloe. Yes, indeed, for those who are not aware, when a country receives a cup, it's not only for that time, it's for the year before and after. Huge work done in tandem with the previous and next country in line to receive the cup. Thank you very much, Chloe. Graham, I'm back to you now. We heard in the first block, Her Excellency talked about implementation. That will be a priority. Him and Chloe talked about losses, prejudices, damages, collaboration. So for you as a member of First Nations, what would be elements of success for COP27?
Yeah, merci, Patrick. And
thank you, Patrick.
Really, really interesting question, only because I feel like the kind of main indices of success in our mind are fairly consistent and have been, as I mentioned, since the 50s, but more, I guess, concretely since the parallel Carioca summit that occurred, in parallel to the Rio summit that happened obviously in '92, and those, broad demands are consistent, and we've heard it both from our esteemed panelists, the ambassador in particular, that need to accelerate action, and Eddie, I think, and Alejandro talked a little bit about the role of the IPCC in that regard, noting also the processes to finalize the summary for policymakers obviously engages in a little bit of political maneuvering, but the messages are still important in the acknowledgement of how we need to accelerate action. And for Indigenous peoples, our demands since Paris have been actually, more stringent than the 1.5 and 2 degree future that was codified within the Paris Agreement. Our demands were a 1 degree future, and unfortunately, as we heard in our opening remarks, that reality has already been overstepped, and we see the implications of that, right? And our people are living the implications of that currently, both within the context, and Eddie summarized this nice, within BC where I am, but around the world. And part of that, in my mind, informs how we need to think about the conversation on loss and damage, and the role that Indigenous peoples play within conceptualizing loss and damage, inclusive of all the ways in which the UNFCCC characterizes non-economic losses. And I appreciated the point that the ambassador shared about this, these conversations on what is the economic model that needs to inform the future that we're creating for our little ones. How does that economic model inform within the UNFCCC how we conceptualize both the losses and the gains of robust, what was the language within the IPCC, immediate, deep, and transformative emissions reductions in all sectors. And so we need to think about it within the context of that. The second broad demand is around the inclusion of Indigenous knowledge systems. And how do we think about, within the UNFCCC, which has been traditionally a very empirical, science-driven process, how do we open up that space for, that values-based conversation that enables us to really get at the core of, what are the sorts of behaviors, human behaviors, as was shared earlier, that was captured within the Working Group 1 report, that are causing the climate crisis, right? How do we, enter into that UNFCCC space with this understanding that there is a responsibility, both individually, institutionally, and nationally, to really characterize that conversation differently, and then open up spaces for that to occur. And obviously, the work of the facilitative working group and the discussions occurring right now on the ethical protocols to engage with Indigenous knowledge are important starting points. But we still have a system that actively ensures the supremacy of one language, right? English, right? And there are inherent problems within that space for the way in which we open up, different languages and the framings behind those languages. And Anishinaabe 70 to 80% of our words are verb-based. In English, the majority is noun-based, and the implication of that is, it removes the action that Chloe shared that's required to take, transformative action. And then I guess, just finally, the among other demands is the full and effective participation of Indigenous peoples, and how do we continue to, open up these spaces like the Indigenous Peoples Pavilion, like the role of the local communities and Indigenous Peoples Platform, like the progress contained within the Glasgow Climate Pact, to ensure that, we're talking about the role that civil society plays and non-state actors, but we also differentiate the role of Indigenous peoples within that space that we're characterizing as non-state actors. We know that, as I mentioned earlier, that UN Declaration comes into the conversation now, and the important roles that will play. And I guess I'll close just with two reflections. One, I think if anything, the IPCC reports, among the myriad of other reports that we see, and I think we increasingly see, that the solutions are there, and what's required is the political will to implement what those look like, and that was both shared by our esteemed representatives of the two presidencies. The question now is how do we operationalize that within the spaces that we have control? And I think of, for example, in an Ontario context, we have the provincial election coming up. We have a myriad of different municipal elections coming up. And so we, have that ability to your point, Patrick, to take action through the years and also to acknowledge the different levels of action that we need to participate. So Chimigwich for that, and apologies for taking a little bit too much time.
Merci beaucoup, Graham.
Thank you so much, Graham. Yes, political will. This is a very important item. We're very happy to have Our Excellency here, and the British Consul in Montreal. She was very open all over the year. Thank you very much, Chloe, for this year. It was important to have this discussion. It doesn't happen often, so highly appreciated. Graham, Your Excellency, Graham was talking about the working group, dialogue, working group, and all the other factors, the question of language, of science to a point. We can speak about science or traditional knowledge. Both are taken into consideration. There's this civil society, states, the global level, local level. So my question, from all the different levels, how do you see your role as ambassador and in the embassy of in Canada to guarantee the success of COP27?
Well, I think the premise here is basically based on consultation and coordination with all stakeholders, and being available for each and every interested entity to know about our vision as the incoming presidency of the COP, the main priorities, and also to channel all the discussions and all the initiatives and different point of views, to channel them to the working group in Egypt, and the joint working groups between Egypt and the UK at this specific time, to make sure that all the views and voices are echoed in the upcoming COP. I personally believe that the main factor for success for COP27 is basically how to ensure that all voices are heard and echoed, and that the outcomes reflect the objectives and the needs of all stakeholders. And this is basically was the intention of the incoming Egyptian presidency in reaching out to different stakeholders at this stage. If you are monitoring the visits and the meetings, the president designates of the COP27, Minister of Sami Shukri, Egyptian Minister of Foreign Affairs, he has received various delegations in Cairo lately, including, of course, the US envoy, the Swiss envoy, the current COP26 president, as well as the number of ministers of foreign affairs, including Germany, Norway, the executive secretary of the UNFCCC, the executive director of the Green Climate Fund, the assistant UN Secretary General for Climate Action, and the vice president of EBRD. All this is basically to hear different voices and to consult on how to ensure a successful COP27. At the meantime, the president-designate also paid a number of trips to many countries. Lately, he's in Spain today. He was in Singapore, which is a leading island nation. He was in Malaysia and met there, and went to Pakistan, the G77 chair. He also went to Indonesia as a G20 chair. So the main target here is to make sure that all groups, we are in direct consultation with all groups, listening to the concerns of each and every group, and making sure that the aspirations and the expectations are voiced and met in the COP27. Needless to mention, of course, the very close coordination between the COP27 presidency and the COP26 British presidency, and between them and the heads of delegations in the periodical meet. I would also mention that engagement with different stakeholders is extremely important, like the African group, the Arab group, the LDCs, the island nations, think tanks, the UN organizations, the NGOs, whether Egyptian NGOs or foreign NGOs. This is extremely important at this stage. We already started engaging with different countries to discuss the initiatives. If there are several initiatives, we have already been approached by initiatives on green economy, on renewable energy, on green hydrogen. So I think it is extremely important that each and every country and each and every entity participating in COP27 to swiftly approach the incoming presidency of COP27 and to put forward initiatives and ideas so that we make sure that the mainstreaming between different initiatives and to prioritize which are the initiatives that needs to be focused on in COP in the upcoming COP. Egypt by itself is already working now internally at the national level to put forward a number of initiatives. Lately, we had an initiative on women and environment and the climate change that we shared with the Canadian government, and we'll be happy to share it with you as well. This is just to basically to stimulate the discussions and make sure that there is a minimum common denominator between all participants on issues related to women, environment, and climate change. The embassy is definitely keen to engage different Canadian with different Canadian circles in the preparation for the COP27. We regularly consult with the government and the parliamentarians and with the civil society, as we're doing today, and we're ready to listen to any ideas or proposals in this direction. I think part also of the current consultation, part of the objectives of the current consultation is to share our view as a presidency, as an incoming presidency. We believe that there is an urgent need to shift, as I mentioned earlier, from the pledges and potential contributions to the delivery and implementation. And this requires a balanced call on climate change that should include adaptation and resilience as key priorities, and to ensure the delivery of finance and technology as main enablers, with the special focus on Africa, because at the end, this is a COP that is organized in Africa. And there is a lot of expectations from the African countries on this COP in specific. There should be as well a balance between the mitigation that is needed to control the global emission, of course, and the need of developing countries to deal with the current and the short-term adverse impact of the climate change. Needless to mention, of course, that the issue of funding represents the cornerstone for the implementation of the national pledges to support what is already allocated on the budget of each and every state. The issue of the financing instrument is also very important, especially when we talk with donor countries like Canada, because this represents a key element in defining the policies and raising the level of ambition. It is important to consider financing climate change projects through different ways and means, innovative ways, whether grants or concessional loans or green funds, which all will encourage the decision makers to take the required decisions without burdening the future generations with financial obligations and burdens. We aspire to quickly finalize the national review process in all countries to provide an updated pledges for the NDC. Finally, we see high importance in the issue of just transition. We believe that this is the basis for dealing with the current phase. And it depends basically on achieving developments in socio-economic aspects in parallel with the environmental aspect. It's a clear request that we hear always from the African countries and the developing countries. I believe that the success depends here on the balanced interaction, whether it's between different stakeholders or balance between developed and developing countries, or even the balanced approach between the issues themselves that we are discussing. I think this is basically the essence of our efforts now, and we are happy to share our views continuously with all participants and different stakeholders here in Canada. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup, Son Excellence.
Thank you very much, His Excellency. Eddie, we just heard that the work is important. It has to do domestically, but there are different realities from one country to the other in terms of implementation, fair transition, despite guiding principles that are very clear. Adaptation is different according to the country and even inside a country. So it's cross-sectional. In this respect, indeed, beyond the states, there are regions, 9, representation of civil society, environmental group are represented, 2 international climate with a very specific role. The question is sometimes between these sections, these voices complete each other or oppose each other at different times. We saw this call for inclusivity, to listen to all the voices. So how to contribute for a non-governmental organization, break the silos to ensure the success of COP? I think it needs to go through, trying to have a common vision of what COP should reach and what roles governments should play. Non-state stakeholders, I think that they are mistakenly called observers. So they don't observe much besides what states are presenting. They are groups that implement locally climate action. They represent, we see it here, indigenous groups, federated states, cities, environmental organizations. They represent millions of people all over the world. So environmental organizations, in this respect, have the responsibility to present a clear vision about the future. In this respect, when we talk about COP27, we need to consider what is around COP27. There are 3 points. First is the geopolitical context. Don't forget, we are currently living in a context of war, where are opposed, of course, two nations, and give all my solidarity to Ukrainian people. But behind that conflict, there are important diplomatic conflicts. Since on one side, we have the G7 states united in this position, giving support to Ukraine, but on the other side, there's Russia. And how can that conflict, how will that conflict, and it will have impact on energy security, food security, and geopolitical relations internationally, whether in the G20. So there will be an impact on the objective, the collaboration that is necessary for COP27. As an environmental organization, our challenge will be to present the vision, and the challenge of the Egyptian presidency will be to bring all the world together to share a vision of transformation for the different bases and general rules for the going forward. What will happen in 2023, 24, 25, when things are accelerating. About this, I see 3 things. First, the ambassador is right. We will talk about transition. There will be a political debate on just or fair transition, on definition, but how it will be funded. And this element will be very much present, a discussion on transition. If you notice, the major moments for the future are in the countries of the South. Besides G7, Convention on Biodiversity is in China, COP is in Egypt. And so you see that we will need, as international civil society, we need to have this look about transition across the road, something that takes into account challenges, needs of colleagues and communities of countries in the South. That is really key. Now, what is our role as a civil society in a country like Canada, a rich country? It will be to define a vision, how the Canadian civil society will be presented and how the government will be presented. This vision of transformation that I wish for IPCC is about transition going away from coal, gas, fuel. And it is also a transition that will allow us to see how different sectors of the society have to meet the urgent climate impacts and also meet the needs of people and the planet. We cannot really think in terms of CO2 tons. We have to think about social services, how the climate policies right now have an impact on social services that are accessible, meet food safety, energy safety. These are the debates that will emerge during COP27 and that we have to expect. We need that to be included in negotiation documents at the end of the day, because this COP is in a regional area in Africa, but in an Arab context. So I think this is like a key moment while we are trying to accelerate climate action. It will force us to bring this question of social justice, equity at the heart of decisions that will be taken during COP27. I think also that, and maybe to conclude, as a civil society, we will need to dare asking authorities, whether you're the Egyptian presidency or UK presidency, to give a vision of a future that ends the construction of pipelines, natural gas, and it starts home. We cannot go to Egypt and impose a vision about this. It's if our country is expanding exploitation of fossil energy. No, we have to do that link. With Graham also, the last objective for me is a decolonization of approaches, of knowledges, and how we are present in these governance spaces. Canada, in fact, is a country with inclusive participation to COP. And we are responsible in all spaces. We have to represent the values of sharing and define our civil society within a COP. Thank you very much, Eddie, on that excellent presentation. 2 minutes left. Alejandro, would you have anything to add about the success of COP27? I don't have much to add on what was said, but maybe one point here I would like to thank the climate reality for organizing this meeting. I think that the change we have seen in COP26 and the acceleration of change we expect for COP27 are possible only because there is an impression of civil society that changed. It changed during the last 10 years. And that's the key. But still, we need to inform, we need those debates. And people need to be aware, and all the different sectors need to join us in this debate. And in closing, I would say that the IPCC needs to tell us what will happen, but we have solutions. 10 years before, we didn't know what would be the details of solutions we do have right now. And I think that COP27 now have even more detailed tools than COP26, because they have the results of contribution 1, contribution 2, how to mitigate climate change. So there, I would like to thank all the panelists and thank you for organizing the event. Thank you very much, Alejandro. Yes, a dialogue for climate. Everyone has a role to play in such an event, locally or globally. It is very important, and this is the reason why, if you were not there last year, we invite you to a second edition of climate dialogues, probably online in Quebec during COP27, to allow this intersectional dialogue between different actors. Sometimes they don't talk one to the other, but are going in the same direction. If you are interested, Gaia will give you the link to our event. And if you have questions for the panelists, send them to Gaia and we will try to send it to the panelists. In closing, thank you. Thank you to our panelists, His Excellency, thank you, Chloe, Alejandro, Graham, Eddie, thank you for participating to this event. Thank you to André for the online translation. And thank you also to all those who were there, who took a few moments today. And in conclusion, a huge thank you to Climate Reality team, mainly Gaia. And His Excellency, we invite you, and We just catch the ball there. You say dialogue is important, and we will be happy to invite you to other such events and maybe participate to the next dialogues. Thank you, all of you, and have a great day.
Bye-bye.
Thank you very much.